This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest on the podcast today comes to us from Northern Illinois, Matt Potts from Destihl Brewery. Welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
We're here in Richmond, Virginia for the Brewery Accelerator event, helping breweries and planning and new brewery owners kind of sharpen their businesses and help be a credit to the industry as a whole. Appreciate Matt coming out and helping share your knowledge with the folks here at the Accelerator.
Glad to do it.
Cool.
You got me out of the brewery, which is an accomplishment in and of itself. So
it's always a good time. Before we get started, nearly 2,000 breweries across the U.S., Canada, Mexico partner with G&D Chillers. Innovative modular designs and no proprietary parts propel G&D ahead as the premier choice for your glycol chilling needs. Breweries you recognize like Russian River, Ninkasi, Jack's Abbey, Samuel Adams, and more trust G&D to chill the beer you love. Call G&D Chillers to discuss your project today or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. Also, Old Orchard invites you to step up your fruit game with their premium craft juice blends. Whether you're planning a passion fruit Kolsch, Concord Sour, Mango Lager, or other fruity brew, Old Orchard can supply you with consistent product at affordable prices. Their blends are packed with real fruit and natural flavors with no added sugar or other weird fillers like you'd find in knockoff brands. With the rising demand for fruity seltzers and brews, the time is ripe to grow your relationship with the right juice supplier. Get your Old Orchard sample kit today with free 6-pack cooler at www.oldorchard.com/brewer. Fruity seltzers, Matt. Everybody's making them.
jumping right into the seltzers on me, aren't you?
No. We'll talk about seltzers later because I know it's a subject, a much loved and sometimes hated subject for brewers, but certainly one that people are engaging in these days.
We can chat about it.
I think we can. I want to talk to you about some hazy IPAs. I want to talk to you about some kettle sour and fruited kettle sour approaches. Definitely want to talk to you about barrel aging because Das Vidania and that family of barrel-aged beers you produce are certainly some of my favorite beers that you've made and have reviewed very highly with the blind review panel at Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. I know you've also won some awards for those kinds of beers, and so I'd love to dig into the brewing mind behind that. But before we do that, why don't you give me the quick background on Matt Potts and your background in brewing and how you got where you are with Destihl Brewing today.
Yeah, so this is going to age me really quick, but actually started practicing law, so I'm actually a recovering attorney.
Sure.
But my wife, Lynn, bought me a homebrew kit in 1995 for Christmas. So a lot of people in our neck of the woods have heard this story 1,000 times. But my story, like so many other brewers, is, it starts at homebrewing. And mine started in 1995. And, my mistake was sharing them with my friends that who really like them. And they, you start getting this confidence in your brewing skills because they actually like the beers. And so started having homebrew parties at my, we actually lived on a farm. We'd get people from law school that I graduated with and undergrad, and we'd have homebrew parties, essentially.
Sure.
My old college rock band, we'd get back together, have a hay rack full of my homebrews, and it gave me all this confidence, whether it was warranted or not.
People liked your homebrew.
People liked my homebrew.
They didn't hate your homebrew.
Correct. So
that was the era.
Step one.
That was the era where a lot of homebrewers like, oh, you want me to drink your homebrew?
Right.
Yeah.
Ooh, yuck, yeah. So that went pretty well, and that gave me enough confidence to, get really passionate and interested about the business of craft beer as well, not just homebrewing and the art and science that's involved with that, but the business of beer. So I really started geeking out with the old issues of New Brewer and all that back in the day. And so really within about less than 2 years after I started homebrewing, this old dilapidated building 1 block down from my law office in a small town of Elmwood, Illinois, population 2,000 people, just a small farming community, but that's where our law office was. I was essentially in a family law practice there in Elmwood, Illinois. It's like West Central Illinois.
Okay.
So this building came up for auction. in October of 1997, about the night before the auction. I kind of remember the conversation, but this whole homebrewing thing was really interesting me, or I was really interested in the business of it. And the night before the auction, I talked to Lynn and said, "Hey, this building's coming up for auction tomorrow. Down the street from the law office. I'm kind of interested in bidding on it." I don't really remember the rest of that conversation because it probably didn't go so well. At that point, my wife was married to a practicing attorney, and
Right.
everything's great. She's an attorney as well. And then I've got this stupid idea about buying this building down the street for a potential brewery. It's an 1896 Oddfellows Lodge, about 10,000 square feet.
So perfectly updated for the kind of purpose that you might...
Perfectly, yeah. Ceiling falling down and roof is leaking, and somebody in the past decided it was a great idea to put plaster over the beautiful brick and all that. But we saw potential in it, and it gave me a way to get into the industry, but maybe still practice law at the same time. Because, in the mid-'90s, I wasn't really ready or willing or able to go all in on brewing and sacrifice the legal thing or the law career. So we went to the auction. We put in our, we were bidding on it. It was a live auction. And we were bidding against the town banker, and the bank was right next door to this building. So we figured, well, we won't get this. He'll outbid us anyway, so we'll go ahead and raise our hand. And, well, he saw us bidding on it, and he probably figured whatever stupid idea we had for this building, he was probably going to make the right. He was going to get to make the loan for it, right? Oh. So he stopped building, and they pointed to us and said sold. So we kind of got into the industry kind of ass backwards, right? Like I had no business plan. We just, like the night before this auction, decided to bid. Yeah, right. Wow. So now we had a building. It's like, I think we actually started crying because it's like, holy cow, what have we just done? Spent $42,500 on this building, which, a lot of potential there, but still, population 2,000 people in a small town. Sure. It's not really a tourist destination, but we saw potential in it. And, of course, after that, I had to work on a business plan and probably spent about a year on that. Long story short, finally got that open actually in December of 2001, so just a short time after 9/11. So that was kind of interesting. You'll kind of see a pattern here as I go through our history about national crises and recessions happening as we continue to expand our brewery business.
Are you implying correlation or causation here?
I don't know. Sure. I just warn people whenever we own something to maybe put their money under the mattress instead of their 401k.
Have you made any significant business investments over the last week?
No.
Okay.
Prices are maybe good right now, perhaps, but. So yeah. Anyway, so we opened in December of 2001. I was still practicing law at the same time, and we were operating the brewery at the same time. So I would practice law for 3 or 4 days a week, and brew beer and run the business. Since that was in a small town, though, we were really relying a lot on distribution through Central Illinois, really along the I-74 corridor. Somewhere along the lines, though, a developer that was developing an outdoor lifestyle kind of mall in Normal had approached us. She actually lived pretty close to Elmwood, and she said, "I really like what you're doing in Elmwood. Really, would you like to do this in a town with people in it?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." Right. And that was the escape hatch, I guess, to finally stop practicing law for a living and going all in on brewing beer. So we packed up the family, Lynn and I did, in December 2005 to start working on what would become Destihl. In between the two, though, I actually went to Siebel Brewing School and really wanted to raise the bar, a notch, going to a higher populated area, and had a little bit of a break between the two, really businesses. But and that was early in 2007. We broke ground in April of 2007 and finally opened
just in time.
Yeah, right. So here it is. Here comes, right? So we open our first brew pub in Normal. Yes, there is a town called Normal, Illinois.
Yeah,
it is kind of normal. It's just normal Midwestern town. home of Illinois State University. Bloomington's got State Farm. We've got country insurance there, so it's kind of an insurance town, but kind of a quasi-college town with ISU being there. Anyway, yeah, so we opened November 23rd of 2007. And I think if you look back at history, I think the Great Recession, the bottom falls out about a week after we open, right? So we're opening a business with the Great Recession starting. A lot of businesses that started around then didn't survive, especially if it's a restaurant, right? But so we really opened that our first brew pub really as like putting the recession aside for a second, but our whole concept at that point, there were some breweries making some great beers out there, but very few really focused on artisan food to pair with artisan beer, right?
Right.
We thought that was a huge disconnect, right? So how can you advocate for great artisan beer, but not have great food, and hopefully some of it locally sourced from local farms and all that. So that was our concept, essentially, to have what we were calling a gastro brew pub. We didn't really use that term a whole lot, but it was kind of best. It was kind of a description of what we were trying to do. So kind of and that's in Normal, which back in 2007 it was just a Bud Miller town. Very no other breweries, of course. Very little craft presence at that point. So we knew that the town, in order for them to really get used to craft beer, that we needed the food side to pair with that. So that's why we really started as a brew pub. So that gets opened, and then the recession hits. But where we could have, because of the recession, where we could have cheapened out, because it was a weird recession because people weren't going out, but the commodity prices were high.
Right.
So it was a really weird dynamic. You would think commodity prices would be low, so the temptation would have been to cheapen our product as a company, right? Cheapen our food, cheapen our beer, etc. What we did instead was stay true to our core values, our concept, and I think that's what got us through. Because if people were going to go out, we were giving them value in exchange for their hard-earned dollars. Of course, 2008 was that was a really rough time because we were just starting out. Not only did we have the Great Recession to deal with, we had a group of four of us that were really the corporate team starting the company. You got myself, of course, Lynn and I as the co-founders, but we also had Troy Nelson, who was our managing partner, really the main guy for the whole restaurant side of the operation. I was bringing more of the business side and certainly the brewing side. Right. And then his right-hand man, Jason Bratcher, Troy's wife Lori, at that point she was our controller, so that was really our core group, right? And as if the recession wasn't bad enough, we also lost Troy to cancer within a few months after we opened. He got diagnosed in February, he was gone in March. I mean, it was such a fast thing that none of us saw coming. So now we're going through that as well. Somehow we survived 2008. So the effects of that recession really lasted for years, but somehow we got our second brew pub financed and opened by April of 2011. So that gets us to our second brew pub. I'm doing all the talking now. I don't know if you're wanting to let me keep going. So we got two brew pubs now.
Fast forward to, give me the 10 seconds to the next, all right, to where you are today.
All right. So you're right. We're two brew pubs, right? We decided to go to GABF for the first time in 2011, that fall after we opened in Champaign. So we go there as an unknown brewery, right? From the middle of nowhere, Central Illinois. Our first GABF. The expectation is that just a lot of people walk by and don't really pay any attention or whatever. Well, what set us apart, and this is where we'll start getting into, I think, a lot more of our beers, et cetera. Out of the 10 beers that we took that year, in fall of 2011, 6 out of the 10 were sour beers, barrel-aged sour beers. Huh. So this is back when there weren't that many sour beers at GABF. You have some of the pioneers in the industry. Vinny, if you're listening, your beers were there, and you had Lost Abbey, and it was just a handful.
Right.
But suddenly there's this brewery in Normal, Illinois that's got, 6 barrel-aged sours within our St. DeCara Reserve Sour program, so all barrel-aged sours. So we went from being an unknown brewery to within about 30 minutes of that GABF having a line across the aisle. And we've all been to GABF.
Sure.
So suddenly we went from unknown to hype, right?
Okay.
Unfortunately for us, we had no packaged product to sell and had to take advantage of it. I mean, we didn't even know what really hyped breweries meant, I guess, back in...
Hype in 2011.
Right.
That was
I don't even know what that means, right? But what I do know is that we couldn't take advantage of any of it because we had no packaged product. We're just two brew pubs. So, okay, great. If you want to come try our beer, you have to either try it at a beer fest or you have to come to Normal or Champagne. So... I guess you could say kind of hyped before our time, but it is what it is. What it accomplished for us, though, it gave us the confidence to open our first production brewery. So, going back more on the beer side of things, like when I went to Siebel, at that point in time, this is like early 2007 before we opened, I didn't really even like or appreciate fully Belgian beers, sour beers, etc. But something happened at Siebel. We went to the Hop Leaf, and I learned everything there was about sour beers, during one of our classes at Siebel. Once you learn about the art and the science, and probably mostly art with sour beers, but a lot of science. Once you learn what all goes into those and how complicated they are, and have somebody actually explain those styles to you that knows what they're doing, and knows as much as there is to know about them. Something sparked, and I got, went from not liking them to being really passionate about it. So one of my goals after we opened Destihl in 2007 was to start a barrel-aged sour program. And we started the first sour barrel in May of 2008 and kind of slowly added more barrels as we went. That brew pub, I think originally, at some point we got up, it wasn't really meant for barrel aging. It wasn't designed for barrel aging. I think at some point we had squeezed probably about 24 oak barrels in there, all sour. So, we started going to FOBAB, which is Festival of Barrel Aged Beers in Chicago with those and GABF, et cetera. But anyway, we didn't do it to make money because we're in Normal, Illinois. It wasn't sour. It was not for business purposes, right? It was to pursue my own personal passion for sour beers because there's no way a sour beer was going to sell in Normal, Illinois in 2007. And I remember back when we put those on tap, back in the day, they'd be on tap forever. It's like, ooh, that's sour. But if you go to a beer fest, like Great Taste of the Midwest up in Wisconsin or anything up in Chicago, then people really appreciated them, loved them, and that's kind of what we got known for as a brewery was sour beers. And after we went to GABF, it was like that's definitely what we were known for. So 2011, that GABF was a game changer for us because it did get us noticed. So we finally got the production brewery going, and our first production brewery going. The first batch I think was in at the end of May of 2013. So here's the thing: we were opening that brewery to sell sour beers, right? Because that's where the demand was. But barrel-aged sours, are going to take 1, 2, or 3 years to really finish out.
Sure.
So it's like, okay, great. Okay, we've got all this demand. We've got a production brewery, and now we won't have a sour beer to sell for a couple of years. This is great.
Sure.
Who's the idiot that came up with this business plan?
Yeah, let's spend millions of dollars in the capital to go build this thing to make a product that we won't sell for a couple of years.
Right, and literally, like every batch of beer we were brewing, I think from May until maybe August of 2013 was just filling barrels. That's a great concept. Let's make a lot of beer and let's not sell it. Like our first wholesale out of there of like non-sour beer was probably August of 2013. Fortunately, we were able, we had the brew pubs going, so they were able to kind of help float this stupid idea, that I had of starting out with all these sours. Eventually, that was a 20,000 square foot space. About a fourth of that was for barrel aging. At some point, that brewery got up to about 750 oak barrels. Our first, I think, 200 came from Justin Winery in California, and slowly we added more barrels here, there, everywhere. We got 3 foeders from France. The shipping on those was as much as one of the foeders cost. One was a cognac foeder, and a red wine foeder, and a white wine foeder. But so we were going all in on barrel-aged sours, right?
Sure.
I mean, that's the gist of all this. So really, in order to fill the demand for our sours before we actually had sours to sell, at least St. DeCara sours, we decided to start making kettle sours, right? To, again, buy us some time. So what we were doing I guess as a gap filler, a stopgap or whatever, just to satiate the appetite for our sours while we were waiting on the barrel aged sours. Little did we know what that was going to turn into for us as a brewery, the whole wild sour series. So I think the first wild sour that we brewed was in November of 2013, like November, December of that year. So those were draft only at that point. One was a Berliner counterclockwise. One was a Gosa, which was almost an extinct style, right?
Sure. It was still relatively early days for the American version of the Goza style.
Exactly correct. So we named that, not just, the thing about Gosas, everybody's got a cute name for Gosas, right? I mean, it's
right. It's made for puns.
It is made for puns. Ours, our pun, which is here Gosa nothing. It actually meant something to us as a brewery, which usually when we were rigging tanks and taking chances from an OSHA standpoint, like using brewers as ballast on the back of a forklift, trying to lift tanks that a forklift really shouldn't lift or whatever. Just anything where you take chances on, we say here goes nothing. So it kind of and doing embarking on this whole kettle sour thing for us was kind of here goes nothing or here goes nothing. So it was kind of an inside joke more than just a cutesy name. The public would generally even really understand or appreciate what that meant to us. But counterclockwise too, again, kind of a fun name, but for us it was kind of the meaning of that original wild sour for us was that it was a very different souring process than what we were used to, right? So with Saint Decara, we would brew a beer like normal. So these aren't, spontaneous fermentations, which we've got some of those going as well. We can get into all the different sours we've got, but like Cool Ships or whatever. But Saint Decara, it's not 100% spontaneous at all. It's regular primary fermentation. You can brew, whatever beer style, but the souring process though is. So to this day we've never bought a wild culture from a lab.
Huh.
So Central Illinois has a lot of farm ground around it. We have a lot of crap in the air that gives us all allergy problems, right? That makes us all sneeze or whatever. Well, it's that kind of air that produces great sour beers. That means there's a lot of stuff in the air, from local farms, wild yeast, bacteria, whatever. So with Saint Decara, we'd put just a whatever beer. Let's say it's a blonde ale. It doesn't really matter. You pick a style, we'll put it in there. Just with regular fermentation, let's say with an ale yeast or lager yeast, doesn't matter. Put it into a barrel. Generally prior to that, though, without giving away all of our secrets, but it doesn't really matter anymore, right? With as many breweries that are out there, but
everyone knows.
Everybody knows it. Yeah, right. So the way we were generally doing it, because we did want to introduce what was in the air in Illinois inside of our barrels, but if we're getting barrels, let's say wine barrels from let's say the Justin Winery barrels, that could have, who knows what in it as well. So we would steam the barrels first, kind of have a neutral base.
Right.
And then as those barrels cool down, it'll suck in the air, our air, right? And that's literally all it took to start Saint Decara. It was not a pitch from a lab or whatever. Saint Decara is, it's, again, they're not spontaneous fermentation, but the souring part of it is. It's just relying on the microflora that we have in the air or whatever might have survived the barrel steaming process, which really most of it just comes from our air, given the consistency that we saw with it. So that was really how we did all those. With the wild sours, kettle sours, the presumption is that you're buying a lactoculture, right, or throwing maybe yogurt in or something, right, like that. Just stay
good belly, or
to stay, I guess, true to what we were trying to do as a brewery. We actually, that is truly a wild culture. We have a house strain that we've had since really 2013 that we started back then.
A pure Lactobacillus?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all.
Impure. Okay.
Not at all. I mean, that's kind of why it's different. And we didn't name it Wild Sour Series because, again, it's a cute name. It's truly because it's a wild culture. So when we were starting that whole series, we kind of grew up that culture from multiple sources. One was dregs from our St. DeCara barrels, so that was, we knew that was some natural microflora. I think those first few batches we had some acidulated malt as well. We also left the kettle door open for several days for those first few batches, just to let whatever's in our air just float in there. And again, those first few kettle sour batches, we'd let them tie up our kettle for probably 4 days.
Okay.
Just to establish a culture.
At a temperature or?
Yeah, well, I mean, generally around 100 degrees or so.
Okay.
And once fermentation starts, you get that wild fermentation.
Sure.
Really maintains that. So we don't do it that way anymore. But by, I think it was March of 2015, we really had the culture where we wanted it. And I kind of refer to this as caging the beast, right? We had this culture that could now sour beer within hours.
Right.
So we put that into a little 7-barrel tank in March of 2015, and that tank hasn't been opened since then. But this is really where the Wild Sour series is so much different, because it's not just lactic culture from a lab. It's really a mixed culture, but obviously the only thing that really has time to work is the lacto.
Right,
but we know there's more in it, right? So every batch of wild sour that we do, we'll pull off maybe a half a barrel into a 60-barrel batch. We'll sour that. We'll feed the culture again just to keep it happy.
Yeah.
So we're just drawing from it, feeding it, drawing from it, feeding it, but we haven't opened the actual tank since March of 15.
Wow. That's cool. Let's talk a little bit more about that. I know that plenty of breweries are struggling, or there are plenty of pundits out there in the world of beer that are trying to wrestle with this idea and balance between kettle sours and traditional sours, and this kind of seeming battle between them. I'd love to mine your thoughts on that. But first, this episode is brought to you by Hopsteiner, your premium hop supplier dedicated to delivering quality hops and hop products in every package. Visit hopsteiner.com for a complete list of offerings, or select shop hops to start ordering today. Also, Fermentis is the obvious choice for beverage fermentation. They've provided the beer industry, from large and small breweries to home brewers, with the best fermentation yeasts since 2003. Their yeasts are easy to use. Just pitch your Fermentis yeast directly into your wort. No rehydration necessary. To learn more about how Fermentis can improve the quality of your fermentation, and for the latest on their exciting new product releases, visit Fermentis.com or visit them at the Craft Brewers Conference in San Antonio, booth 8071. So Matt, you start with this goal of brewing traditional sour beers with this long aging process, taking fully fermented beer and then going through the 1-2 year process, kind of Rodenbach style fermented beer that then becomes sour beer. But to speed up that process and have a product, you take the same kind of mixed culture and make these quicker sour beers. How has that quicker side of your business impacted sales and the identity of your traditional sours? Are they complementary? Do they compete against each other? How do you jive those as a company?
It's been tough. I mean, where we have to pay a lot of homage to St. DeCara, because that's really what started this whole thing. And then the challenge for us has been, we've been so busy with everything else between wild sours and now NEPAs, is that St. DeCara has been a neglected child. So our goal, I don't know if it happens this year, I really hope it does, and it probably needs to, but we need to come back around, right? We need to circle back around and start spending some time on St. DeCara. We've got some barrels that have a lot of age on them.
Sure.
And we're going to have to do some blending. We've still probably got about, we did whittle down that program to about 500 barrels, maybe 400 or 500 barrels. When we moved breweries from the old one to the new one, not all
That's
of them
your definition of whittling down to 500 barrels?
I think so.
Okay.
If that's fair. We knew not every barrel would make that journey.
Sure.
In 2017, when we opened our new brewery, we only had the one TTB license, so we were allowed, like, I don't know, so many days to really transition. So we had to move 750 oak barrels, from the old brewery to the new one, knowing full well that not every barrel was going to make that journey successfully.
Right.
And then we also had to wait and literally pull a nail from every single barrel after a few months to really see what did make the journey successfully and not. Of course, we tried to purge the airspace with CO2, so if there was any, obviously the beer is going to move around inside the barrel.
Sure.
But disturbing pellicles and everything else, we want to make sure we had a CO2 environment as that happened, and hoping that the pellicles would reestablish themselves. Most of the barrels made the journey fine, but I do remember at some point our head brewer Alex did several barrels. I remember doing several hundred barrels myself, like pull a nail, actually drilling sometimes for the for the first time, drilling the holes and stainless steel nails. Thanks, Vinny. And then that was a tough day because probably took me a couple days, but a lot of Tums, going through that many through that many barrels, and any barrel that didn't make it, we had the blue tape to put a big X on it, that had to be euthanized, and but it kind of made the whole program a little bit more manageable. That the thing is, what was also going on this whole entire time was the death of the large bottle format in retail, right? So, and just bottles in general being more difficult, and we've been going more and more to cans, which we can kind of get into that as well. But which when we started Wild Sour Series in 2013, that was draft only, but by the fall of 2014. Well, even before, really about a year before, we wanted to be the first sour beer in a can. Well, a couple breweries beat us to that. One was Westbrook with their Gosa, and one was Anderson Valley with their Gosa. And then here comes us. Well, we're the third one out there. But we decided to release the first entire series of sour beers in cans. So I guess we'll claim, we'll see if any listeners will dispute this, but that we were the first series of sour beers in cans. And the third, I'm sure somebody will find an exception to that, or say that somebody beat us to. So somewhere in the top 10.
You're an early mover. Early mover. Yeah.
All we know is somewhere in there, right? All we know for sure is Westbrook and Anderson Valley. I'm sure there's another one in there that. But it was an early entrant, and that was kind of a game changer, right? I mean, back in our barrel aged souring days with Saint DeCara, that was like. Blasphemy, right? To put sour beer in a can. They should be in cork and cage and selling for $25 a bottle. And here we come, and we're trying to sell a 4-pack of Wild Sour Series for $9.99. So it's a little industry changing because it made sour beer accessible, and more affordable, and more in higher volumes as well. So we what we did as a convenience to buy time before Saint DeCara came out, ended up ultimately being at one point probably about 60 to 70% of our production.
Wow.
So, and now it's because of the Hazy IPAs taking off so well, it's probably more like 50%. So I like having a little bit more balance on the in the portfolio right now. But that's kind of where we're sitting.
That's a lot of canned kettle soured beer.
Yep.
Yeah. Talk to me about your approach to brewing it. You mentioned you had the early ways of doing it and tying up your kettle for 4 days.
It's changed a lot.
What does that process look like for you? Obviously now brewers tend to be much more concerned about oxygen ingress, during that kind of lactic souring process, trying to get beneficial fermentation flavors out of that lactose souring rather than negative stuff that they have to kind of pull out or overshadow or compete against then with flavoring. From your perspective, obviously using this mixed culture to still continue to do that quick souring, what does that look like for you? How do you what goals are you looking for in that kind of flavor and sour output, and what do you find works for you to produce good results?
Yeah, so the process from the early days at the old brewery to what we do now, we see that pH drop so fast now. Even same day, but so usually, let's say we do the mash today, we're boiling it tomorrow.
Yeah,
and it's generally it could be a shorter boil, but But one thing that has helped us a lot, at the old brewery, we started with a 20-barrel brew house, and we were starting out with sours. It would tie up that kettle for way too long in those early days. So we eventually had like some dedicated sour kettles, if you will. Well, at our new brewery, we kind of expanded upon that. So our brew house, we have a standard 60-barrel brew house on one side with the mash lauter tun and the brew kettle and whirlpool. But on the other side, we actually have dedicated sour kettles. One's a 60, and then we have 120, which actually has a gross capacity of 180 barrels if we don't actually boil in it. And then we have another 58 barrel, let's just call it 60 barrel, our original dedicated sour kettle, which we call Daisy. And at one point we converted a couple tanks into Bo and Luke. You can kind of get the Dukes of Hazzard tie in there. So
now these are sour full-on kettles that can reach boil. They're not just sour vessels.
Right now they can be set up to boil in them.
Oh, wow.
Right now they're not, but that's the capability as we need to free up the main brew house more and more. Sure. They are capable. One is a 60 that's already got a steam jacket on it. The other, the 120 barrel kettle, actually is already kind of pre-designed to add a external calandria to it. So that's going to really help us as a brewery, especially as other beer styles take off for us, like the Deadhead IPA series, all the Hazy IPAs, to where we're going to have to boil on the right in those sour kettles. So we call them sour kettles, but right now we're not boiling in them. Everything gets boiled in the boil kettle. So, but once we add souring there, then they can just stay in place and boil in place, and it's going to make it a lot easier for us to produce those and keep the other system rolling with non-sour beers. So
that's an incredible investment into making this, very specifically making this style of beer.
Yeah, Sprinkman built this for us, and at that point, this is the most unique system that they've built because so much of our production are sour beers. We had to have part of our system dedicated to that, while allowing us to brew other beers. We couldn't tie up our system like that. So it's, if we needed to, we could, on this system, we could produce over 400 barrels of wild sour in a day. But generally, we don't have to do that yet. So, but it's capable of it.
Sure, sure.
But and so right now it's. Again, probably about 50% of our production as it sits. So
yeah, talk to me about kind of flavor goals, approach, inspiration, for these kettle sour beers.
So yeah,
what do you like? How did you idealize these? I mean, there were, in terms of kettle sour beer, there weren't a lot of corollaries to look to as you started creating these things in 2013. You had to kind of envision something and then shoot towards it. And I imagine that you've also iterated on that over the last number of years as you've tightened processes, but also had more flavor inputs and tasted more things. Talk to me a little bit about how now you envision those beers and what you shoot for and how you build ingredients and a process around that.
Yeah, I actually think the Wild Sour series now is probably better than ever. I mean, they're probably a little bit more tame. They as far as the acidity levels.
Do you have a general goal for these, or does it change by brand?
Well, the goal was to make them a little bit more, drinkable, but without blending. So it's still our goal not to blend them down. That's kind of have been our. What I mean by blending down with like non-sour beers, right?
Sure,
like maybe putting 10% sour beer into a non-sour beer and just
You're trying to hit your acidity goals and your pH goals with
all
a single stream beer and
not blending it down. Which you could do that. It's just not what we do. We just like that beer to stand on its own merits and controlling the souring process instead of blending it down with non-sour beer. Now that could increase your volumes, obviously decrease the amount of investment you need in dedicated kettles, et cetera, because you can blend it with non-sour beer, but that's just not what Destihl is, whether it was back in the St. Decara days or now in the Wild Sour days. Those batches are 100% soured. We've done some collabs like Ain't Nothing Normal with Night Shift, where we have done some sour IPAs, which has like a half of it's a soured batch and half of it's not, and you blend it together, add some fruit, and it's kind of those have been fun for us as well. But that's under a completely different brand. So, of course, wild sours. We've got the year rounds are non-fruited. So we've got Here Goes to Nothing to this day, still a year-round brand for us. Flanders Red.
You can sell a kettle sour beer without fruit in it?
No, believe it or not,
no,
you can.
I don't believe you. I don't believe you.
They don't have the growth rates that the fruited ones do,
Right.
or the cost.
Sure.
But it's great to be still able to sell Here Goes to Nothing, and then Flanders Red, which we've had also for a long, long time as well. And then Psychopathic, which is dry hop sour. So it's a pretty cool beer as well with that hop character that you get. But then all the seasonals generally tend to be fruited. So the big change we made this year, which is more on the business side, which I know we're not talking about as much, but the year rounds are 6-packs now. Like Wild Sour Series has always been 4-packs all across the board. The big change this year is that the year rounds are 6-packs, just because we've got the volume to or the capacity to brew a lot of good volumes of those. So we figured we'd, and because we don't have the cost in those as we do with the fruited ones, we move those to 6-packs. But all the fruited ones, the seasonals, are still in 4-packs just because you use an insane amount of fruits, hundreds of pounds of fruit in each one of those. And we use all real fruit as brewery. We don't believe in extracts, never will, never have.
Why?
Well, they taste like medicine or
They don't all taste like medicine.
Yes, they do. I think they do.
All right.
I mean, whether they do or not.
When you say whole fruit, are you talking about you also use
puree?
And
we'll use
juice?
purees.
Okay.
What I'm talking about is not using extracts.
Fair.
To me, the extract process, you end up with chemically flavors, like kind of again, I kind of refer to it as medicinal or chemical kind of flavors. So it's where we just try to stay true to our core values as a brewery, using real fruit, but yes, mostly puree because it's the easiest for us to handle on the scale for sure. We'll still play around with some whole fruits, local stuff, especially for the beer hall at the brewery, but. Really, anything for distribution is going to be generally in a puree form.
Yeah. I want to talk about some other beer styles, before we finish up here. And but before we do that, this episode is brought to you by Brewers Publications, publishers of Small Brewery Finance by Maria Pearman, How to Brew by John Palmer, and the forthcoming Historical Brewing Techniques by Lars Marius Garshol. Established in 1986, Brewers Publications has published more than 50 books of enduring value for amateur and professional brewers alike. Visit brewerspublications.com today to browse the complete catalog of books and ebooks. Also, Craft Beer and Brewing's all-access subscriptions give you a year of print and digital editions of the magazine, plus access to our library of video courses, a special deep dive email only for all-access subscribers, premium content, and all-access exclusive merchandise. Go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button, join now, support what we do, and help us bring you conversations like the one we're having with Matt right now. Matt, you mentioned New England style IPAs are also a hot button growth item for you, as they are for a lot of breweries around the country. Talk to me about how you got into that and how you envisioned a variation on that style that was going to taste like a beer that the Destihl should make. Yeah,
so we've always been most known as a sour brewery, right? All that said, I'm still a hophead at nature, or by nature. So this has given us an opportunity to really diversify as a company and showcase that we can do more than just sours. So granted, we had to get them where we wanted them, and for us, we wanted to distribute them. So it wasn't really easy because a lot of hazy beers will be sold out of a tap room just locally or whatever. Well, we're distributed in like 37 states. So the challenge for us was...
It can't be this has to be drunk within 3 or 4 weeks and then it goes to shit.
Correct.
It has to be.
And it actually has to be hazy, though, at the same time.
Right.
Because a lot of those that are more widely distributed, then they're not really truly hazy.
They start to drop out. It's not stable. Sure.
Correct. So that was our challenge, is we wanted them for more than just the beer hall. We actually wanted to distribute them. So how can you possibly even think of distributing a hazy IPA and that wide of a footprint? The reason we have that wide of a footprint is because the market share for sours in any given market isn't going to be that much. So Destihl as a brewery has always had to go more wide than deep, from a marketing strategy. Whereas IPA brewers are going to go more deep, not white at all.
Right.
So this is a little different for us because we're trying to introduce.
Now you have to create a product that fits your distribution footprint.
Ideally, right?
Yeah,
Otherwise, you're gonna have to limit it to home state or whatever. So our goal was to really develop one that actually was shelf stable, and ours right now has a 90-day shelf life. And a lot of that was just, again, trying, it took more pilots than what we're used to, but getting it to a point where it was, you got that permanent haze. That doesn't mean some of that's not going to drop out, and you want to kind of rouse the can a little bit. But what you don't want is like a bunch of slugs coming out either.
Sure.
So a lot of that's just...
what'd you learn through that process?
We learned a lot through that process. I know there's been big controversies about hazy beers and... versus all the work that's been done for decades about making beer not hazy, right?
Sure.
It's just a different style, right?
Brewers have been working on making beer hazy for just as long. We have this style called Hefeweizen.
Right, exactly.
Everyone's been trying to make hazy for,
right. And one of our core beers, it's still a year-round beer for us, and was one of our first 3 beers to brew as Destihl was our Weisenheimer Hefeweizen. So nailing that haze, arguably we've been brewing that beer for, not arguably, we have been brewing that beer since 2007. So bringing some of that knowledge into the picture too. So obviously combining low flocculating yeast with high protein malts, generally around 25% high protein, just kind of that was a lot of that piloting process. Like, okay, no, we need actually more protein malts and more protein, like more than we really would have thought to really make that permanent haze.
Is there a mash regimen that you use to kind of, encourage that?
Not really, but it's more in the just a percentage of the high protein malts, and generally a combination of flaked oats and wheat. And it varies a little bit based on the Deadhead brand that we're brewing in terms of the actual malt bill. But generally, it's going to be a combination of flaked oats, wheat, Pilsen malt, and some 2-row. I really like what the Pilsen malt does in combination with the 2-row or by itself. But obviously, in staying away from the any crystal malts, we're not generally doesn't work too well.
Especially if it's got to be good 90 days from now.
Right, exactly. So want to strip that out. And then the timing of the hops too, right? So that you're forming those permanent bonds with the polyphenols in the hops with the proteins. So no kettle finings, obviously, and adding whirlpool hops, and then we double dry hop everything essentially. Sure. We don't put double dry hop on
balance. Like, I know I have talked to some brewers where they seem to, if their goal is that longer kind of time frame for the viability of these beers, they tend to put a little more in on that hot side or that whirlpool, maybe a little less in on the dry hop, versus some of those breweries that are focusing on fresh right now, where they definitely tilted in favor of the dry hop. Do you find that balance changes for you as a kind of production brewery that's moving beer out over time?
Yeah, I think what's worked for us, if we're adding overall like close to 5 pounds per barrel, two of that'll be in the whirlpool, but over different editions, like a 20-minute and then a 30, and then about 3 pounds split between a first dry hop, usually around 68 degrees. That'll be about a third of that remaining 3 pounds, and then about 2/3 of that will be, and that's really within that first like 2 or 3 days, and then that second dry hop will be in about 7 days for that remaining amount. So
you're working on a little bio-transformation on that first with some active yeast, sure.
Yep. And so that second one will be after we've raised the temp a little bit too, so from 68 to 72. So.
Are there hops combinations in particular that you find yourself specifically drawn to, or do your hops choices change because you are looking at this longevity? I mean, I know we all think of hops just as flavors, but even different hops varieties have different performance factors and different time frames for the viability of some of the flavors that they help produce. Are there hops that work better than others for you for these beers that you need to last longer?
We've had a lot of success with Mosaic, Eldorado, even Cascade, which a boring hop, but it's done really well with the hazy beers. Certainly Citra, just started. We've got an upcoming one within the Deadhead series called Driving That Haze. It's got some cashmere in it, so that's a different hop for us to use. So that should be kind of fun. And it's got Amarillo in it as well. So a lot of it is kind of dependent on what's available.
Sure.
Because the quantities that we use, sometimes that's a limiting factor. But what we generally have tried to do is use like 2 or 3 varieties per release, so that we can kind of adjust that amount to what works, within the 2 or 3 hops that we're trying to use, instead of having single variety hops.
Right.
Gives us a little bit more flexibility to find that right balance.
Makes sense. That makes sense. Before we, we're starting to get towards the end here, but I definitely want to start talking to you about barrel-aged imperial stouts.
Okay.
Das Vidania is something that helped put you all on the map with us years and years ago. Sent in some for an imperial stout review that we were doing, and I think it just blew us all away with how concise and focused and direct and clean and spirit influenced, but also rich in supporting that whole beer was. Scored incredibly highly and became a favorite of ours around Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. You've obviously won some medals at FOBAB for that as well. Talk to me a little bit about how you brew those that Das Vidania family of beers and these clean barrel-aged beers for that kind of success.
Right. So we're not just a sour brewery.
Yeah.
I mean, Dos Vidania has been one of our most celebrated and awarded beers, and it's it does speak to our barrel aging I guess experience with that we've had with St. Decara, but these are clean beers, so it's a very different world for us. I appreciate all the feedback on that, because that's what we think about it too. It's just got just the right balance of barrel, chocolatey notes. It kind of depends on the variant, because we got Dose Bourbon, which is the original, and then we've got Dose Rye, which has some rye, which adds a little spicy note, and then that's generally what we distribute. But then we actually have variants at the brewery. We've had Dose Coconut, Dose Vanilla Rye. This year we had several. Mexican chocolate, coffee, double barrel, which was white port barrels and bourbon barrels, and then I think I'm forgetting one. I know I'm forgetting one now that I'm thinking about it. But anyway,
is this like talk to me about the approach to this? Blending is especially in these kinds of barrel-aged beers, is something that's more common. Do you conceive of these individual releases as single stream beers? Are you building a blending stock? Is it a similar recipe? Obviously rye and bourbon's going to be a little bit different maybe. Right. Are you changing these recipes based on the barrels and the treatments that are going into these beers?
For sure. Yep.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Dose Rye, would actually have rye in the recipe, and we also put that in rye whiskey barrels to pair with that. Right. And then we've our other main base is just Dose. We call it Dose Bourbon because it's in bourbon barrels, generally Heaven Hill. And then the rye whiskey barrels, we're getting those from Sagamore Spirits, Maryland distillery. So those two will generally act as our base for all the variants. One, either or both of those.
Right.
And then we're doing the treatments. Again, those are our main distributor ones, but we'll take either some of Dose Bourbon or some of Dose Rye, and then we'll do the treatments out of that. So generally, we'll the barrel aging process doesn't involve all those other treatments yet. We'll do that more on the bright tank side. Adding whether it's a toasted pecan or whatever else we're going to add, the coffee or whatever. So. But as far as the barrel aging process, generally we're using either of those recipes, Dose Rye or the original Dose. And I think a mistake a lot of people will make with bourbon barrels is probably aging them for too long. We've done a talk at FOBAB about that before, and it at a certain point, we have done one release of Dose where it was aged for about twice as long, which was pretty cool. It was a great beer as well, but generally the barrel aging process is going to be more like 4 months or so for those. So that and that recipe, it goes back to I think 2000. 2009 or so when we brewed the first one. It's actually do another probably shout out, but Keith Gabbett, who's now the brewmaster at Goose Island, he was actually our first assistant brewer as a brew pub in Normal.
Yeah.
But he was moving back to Chicago, so brewed Dos Vidania just to say goodbye to him. It was a Russian Imperial Stout, so we named it Dos Vidania to say goodbye,
right?
Out of respect for him, and he moved on to Goose Island, and he's worked his way up and to become their brewmaster now. But so what started for us just to serve that purpose has kind of grown into a pretty cool brand for us, and we still have Dos Vidania days, and it's always a Saturday before Thanksgiving. I know bottle releases are challenging in the industry right now. There's so many of them, but we'll have several hundred people line up outside the brewery, even to this day, even with the challenges in that large bottle format. But the big change for us last year, Dos Vidania was always in a 500 ml bottle with some of them in wax or whatever.
Right. Last
year we switched to cans. We thought for sure there'd be a big controversy about that, but at the same time we're like, well, how could there be controversy? Because everything is going into cans right now. So it actually worked out really well. It allowed us to kind of introduce a lot more variants this year, and they looked great. They were in a black can, black lid. It was really cool. So anyway, it's all about balance in that beer. Just trying to. I can't really give the secrets to it, obviously, but it's worked out pretty well between the GABF medal and Best in Show and runner-up Best in Show. Got something, something there with that one that we'll probably keep that one a little closer to our chest. But
fair enough. Matt, if people want to learn more about Destihl, where do they find you guys?
Destihl.com. It's just that easy, and it's got all of our
that's
Twitter.
Destihl.
That's correct.
Destihl.
Yeah, and. Purportedly, we've got some Facebook account, and Twitter account, and Instagram, and all that. I'm one of the last humans that doesn't have. I'm not on social media, but I know our company is. So we've got people that maintain that. But anyway, we can be reached through all that as well. But all that information can be on the website at Destihl.com.
I gotcha. G&D Chillers offers innovative modular designs. Old Orchard invites you to step up your fruit game. Hopsteiner is your premium hop supplier dedicated to delivering quality hops and hops products. Fermentus is the obvious choice for beverage fermentation. And Brewers Publications has published more than 50 books of enduring value for amateur and professional brewers alike. If you've enjoyed this episode, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, and become a supporter and member of our craft beer and brewing extended family. Matt Potts from Destihl Brewing, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. It's fun.
Cheers.
Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.